There is a giant elephant in the room when it comes to the current state of the Golden State Warriors, and I think you guys can kind of figure out what that may be. And that, for me, is Jonathan Kuminga and what the Warriors have looked like since the return of Jonathan Kuminga. There's a lot to get to here. Obviously, a lot has happened over the last 7 games or so. And as you guys know, I haven't been around to talk about what's been going on game by game. So we'll get to all the nuances of the things that we need to get to when it comes to the Warriors. But first and foremost, hello, my dear friends. It is so good to be back. I am indeed back in action. Now, some of you guys may know what had been going on. My account was hacked. It was hijacked because my Gmail accounts were hacked. And so I have been dealing with this ordeal for the last couple of weeks, both in terms of my personal email and my business email. And until I was able to get these things under control and resolved, I ultimately just had to lay low until the situation was fully resolved. And I'm happy to say that it is fully resolved now. I missed you guys. I appreciate all the messages that you sent my way. And I'm sorry that I could not fill you in on what was going on. As some of you may know, my YouTube account was fully hacked and taken over at some point. And then at some point, the account itself just got deleted. But thank the heavens, I was able to retrieve my account. And so I didn't lose all of you guys. And ultimately, I'm just grateful to be back. I'm grateful to have you guys still on board. I'm grateful to have this channel still in my possession. And I'm grateful to be able to continue to do what I always do, which is to cover the current state of the Warriors and find solutions for the problems that they may be dealing with. For those of you that have been waiting on me, I truly appreciate your patience. And now we can get back to the regular schedule. Having said that, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and that like button so that this video gets out to all the Warriors fans out there. Now, let's get straight to it. So as you guys know, leading up to me getting hacked, all the videos that I had been making prior since the Jimmy Butler trade, basically, you guys saw a lot of smiles on my face, video after video after video. The fun and the joy had returned. Steve Kerr and his coaching staff were able to figure out some really important things that helped the Warriors thrive since the Jimmy Butler acquisition. They figured out some Steph Curry-centric lineups, they figured out some Jimmy Butler-centric lineups, and when you combine those staggered minutes along with those closing lineups where Guy Santos got more of an opportunity, a bigger role, and was really coming into his own, and they created these formations in certain lineups like Draymond at the center spot, Jimmy Butler at the small forward or power forward spot, same thing with Guy Santos who's at the small forward or power forward spot, and then Moody would end up being the POA of the team next to Steph Curry, and the Warriors were on a roll. And things weren't necessarily perfect. They still needed to figure out some important things, including that starting lineup, where the Warriors kept going back and forth between these small lineups where it's Steph Curry, Potts, Moody, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond, or sometimes if one of those guys is missing, they'll put Quinton Post into that starting lineup. And with the guys that they had, they found great continuity. Everybody was on the same page, everybody knew their roles exactly, and there were no weird parts that didn't really fit or anything along those lines. And that was the biggest concern when it came to the return of Jonathan Kuminga and how his return was going to impact everything that they were doing before his return. Such as, when he comes back, whose minutes is he going to eat up? Would Jimmy Butler be able to help Kuminga's game and make him into a better player, just like he did with just about everybody else he did on this roster, including Moses Moody, Potts, Quinton Post, and to some extent even guys like Draymond, and to some extent even a guy like Steph Curry? Yeah, so could Kuminga come back into this equation and fit into what they were doing? Because the Warriors were not going to break things up and compromise whatever it is that they'd been doing for the sake of Kuminga. Because guess what? Without Kuminga in the rotation, the Warriors were 12-2 since the Jimmy Butler trade. And one of those losses came against the Mavericks when the refs completely rigged the game against the Warriors. And then the other loss came against the 76ers, the one game that Jimmy Butler ended up missing. And things initially started off well when he came back against the Sacramento Kings. The Warriors were able to decimate the Kings in a blowout victory. But unfortunately, and sad to say, since the return of Kuminga, things have changed for this team and things have not gotten better because of Kuminga. I would go as far as to say that all that joy and fun that I was having when the Warriors were going on that run without him, that joy that I was feeling went away when Kuminga had to come back into the rotation, because a lot of the fundamental things that were going so well for this team, well, I saw those things kind of break apart, and the Warriors are no longer that consistently connected team for a majority of the game. And that's when I'm the most thrilled, when the Warriors look connected and are playing a great style of basketball. The biggest issue for me is that Kuminga, from a defensive standpoint, and quite honestly, this is how I felt about him since his rookie year, and unfortunately, it just hasn't changed over time. It didn't change in year 2, it didn't change in year 3, and there was not enough of a change even this year. And now he has to fit into a weird situation where he's in a contract year and he's a guy who wants to be and needs to be featured in the offense. But that can't really happen with Jimmy Butler on board anymore, because the ball in Jimmy Butler's hands is better than the ball in Kuminga's hands. Like, the Warriors cannot be playing an offense where Butler has to fit in with Kuminga. It obviously, and needless to say, has to be the other way around. And the problem is that for Kuminga, he's always been a more impactful offensive player than a defensive player. And for me, the hope was that he would elevate the energy level of his defense when he came back, playing more of that small forward position rather than the power forward position. And unfortunately, I have not seen that change from him. His defense has been very lackadaisical. There's just very little force when he's on the defensive end of the floor. Like, the Warriors are not consistently getting stops because Kuminga is out there on the floor. Combine that with the clunkiness of his offensive fit next to Jimmy Butler, and it just hasn't been a very good fit at all since his return. And the Warriors, having to play the last 2 games without Steph Curry, have looked like a complete shell of themselves, and the Warriors are starting to look like one of the worst teams in the league again. And even before Steph Curry got injured, even in the games that they were winning, they were barely winning those games, even with Steph Curry. Against a team like the Raptors, against a team like the Knicks. I mean, they went right back to being one of those teams where every game ends up going down to the wire, and every game is a clutch situation because you no longer have that margin for error that you did prior to the return of Kuminga. And you look at a guy like Guy Santos and his minutes, and the way his minutes have been dwindling down, and him losing his role as a fixture part of the piece, and as a matter of fact, he was quickly becoming a closing lineup guy for this team, and they were winning games doing that. And suddenly, the next thing you know, his minutes are dwindling down. The other game, he played like 4 minutes. And there's a really sad stat that I have to show you guys. Not that this is the end-all be-all, but take a look at Guy Santos's net rating, his 2-man net rating with just about everybody that is in rotation for the Warriors. Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's a player in the starting lineup. It doesn't matter if it's a bench player. Guy Santos next to everybody is a positive. The only one he's not a positive next to is with Pat Spencer. Those 2 guys combined have a net rating of minus 1.4. Negligible differences. Pat Spencer is not even in rotation. But there is one single player where Guy Santos is an utter negative when he's next to this guy, and that is Jonathan Kuminga. The last time I posted this information, their net rating was a negative 10.9. Since then, the information has been updated to a negative 19. Kuminga and Santos next to each other. Conversely, I just posted this tonight. Take a look at this. This is the 2-man net rating with Jonathan Kuminga. There are 4 guys that are a positive next to Jonathan Kuminga. Only one of them is a relevant number, and that's with Steph Curry. Everybody else is negligible differences. Kevon Looney, Draymond Green, and Buddy Hield are the only ones who are a slight positive next to Jonathan Kuminga. Everybody else in rotation, meaning 8 players, actually 7 if you want to take Pat Spencer out of the equation, are a negative next to Jonathan Kuminga. Like I said, the 2-man game between Jonathan Kuminga and Guy Santos has a negative net rating of 19.5. Kuminga is a minus 22 next to Quinton Post, and this may be the most important one of all. He is a minus 8.8 next to Jimmy Butler, the guy who has made everybody else better on this team, but he cannot make Jonathan Kuminga better next to him. Now you can say that they need time to gel and Kuminga's missed a lot of time and he's not hitting his 3-point shots and all these things. But I don't think that Kuminga has ever been a good player for the Warriors unless the ball is in his hands and a lot of stuff is created on his behalf, particularly when he's playing next to Steph Curry. Matter of fact, when Steph Curry is playing next to Jonathan Kuminga, oftentimes it ends up being that Steph Curry ends up having to play for Jonathan Kuminga rather than the other way around. Most of the time you'll see Steph Curry setting that screen, that inverted screen for Jonathan Kuminga so that he has a matchup advantage or he's free to go straight to the rim because Steph Curry is drawing 2 on that screen. And see, that's the messed up nature of having Jonathan Kuminga on this roster, is that you have Steph Curry on your team. And when Steph Curry and Jonathan Kuminga are on the floor at the same time, it's more often that Steph Curry ends up having to play for Jonathan Kuminga, and not that Jonathan Kuminga is playing for Steph Curry. Do you see the really screwed up nature of that dynamic right there? And then again, there's the fact that the Warriors figured out a Steph Curry-centric lineup when Jonathan Kuminga was not in the equation. That being Steph Curry, Buddy Hield, GP2, Guy Santos, and Kevon Looney. You got defensive guys in there, you got hard screen setters in there, and you got guys that are always looking for Steph Curry when they are in transition after playing said great defense. And Steph will still be playing for those guys. But in return, those guys play for Steph. And then all of a sudden, you have a Steph Curry-centric lineup where Steph Curry has an opportunity to go on a run, a flurry, because those guys are prioritizing and looking for him first and foremost, rather than trying to prioritize themselves and worry about what they need to get in terms of numbers, scoring, and all this kind of stuff. And let me tell you something. This is something that I have been fighting for, and this is something that I have been pleading for when it comes to the Warriors and the offense they run for a very long time. Because the Warriors have a tendency to run a bunch of motion offense where Steph Curry is standing in the corners and basically doing cardio and doing nothing for the majority of the first and the third quarters. And in that scenario, all you're doing is wasting the greatest offensive weapon that you have ever seen in your life. You have to have at least a couple minutes segment where Steph Curry has the ball in his hands or the offense is prioritizing him as he relocates to find the ball back to him. And when you have those segments, Steph Curry is suddenly in rhythm throughout the course of the game, and suddenly he's hitting all kinds of ridiculous shots that you think, oh my goodness, that's a tough shot. There's no way that shot is going in. And yet, boom! Boom! It's like, oh my gosh, he hit that. Boom! Oh my god, 30-footer. He hit that like nothing with a hand in his face, 2 hands in his face, 4 hands in his face. Boom! Half-court shot. Boom! It doesn't matter what kind of shot. If Steph Curry is in rhythm, any shot is subjected to go into that basket. But you're not getting those minutes if you fail to prioritize him. And with Kuminga in the mix and equation, we're starting to see these weird quarters again where Steph Curry's getting like 1 or 2 shots in a quarter. And that's a great way to lose your margin of error for those segments where Steph Curry in the first 6 minutes of the game, the Warriors starting lineup isn't really running anything specific offensively. They're just trying to get into a rhythm and trying to set a tone defensively. And then it's those final 2-3 minutes before he takes a seat. That's when he starts to get it going with the bench unit filing in. So when Kuminga was out of the lineup, they had those segments and it was beautiful. And then they went straight into Jimmy Butler-centric lineups. And those lineups were doing really well. So ultimately, I just don't see where Jonathan Kuminga fits into the picture of what the Warriors are trying to do. He has to completely change his style of play. He has to become more of a Guy Santos or a GP2-like player where the hustle is there consistently and he's diving on the floor for loose balls and he's attacking the glass to make sure that the Warriors may have second chance opportunities because of his presence. The problem is that he's never been that type of player. That's not where he's made his impact. He's always made his impact as a scorer for this team. And so far from what I've seen, his presence has hurt this team so badly to the point that the joy that I was feeling and all the fun and the smiles that you guys were seeing when I started each of these videos for the past month or so, oh, that's gone. At this point, for me, I am resigned. I am resigned to the possibility of the Warriors fighting just to stay out of that play-in situation again. Because now they are performing like they're back to being a middle of the pack team rather than being one of the best teams in the league, which is what they were playing like and which is what they were looking like before the return of Kuminga. Look, it doesn't matter what offensive production that Kuminga can provide for this team if he's a non-impact on the defensive end of the floor and the Warriors just end up giving all the points that he's scoring right back to the other team because the other team is getting whatever they want because there is no defensive force when Kuminga is on the floor with all these weird wonky lineups where it's like him, Buddy Hield, and Quinton Post are on the floor at the same time. In that case, you have a bunch of net negative or weak defensive players on the floor. 3 of the players on the floor are not good enough defensively. And those are the kinds of lineups that are going to give up generational momentum to the other team. We didn't have these issues when we only had to deal with certain lineups where they only had to deal with Buddy Hield, where they only had to deal with Quinton Post. Minimize the weaknesses of some of the weaker defenders by surrounding them with stronger defenders. But with Kuminga in the equation, suddenly you added a whole new problem that the Warriors didn't have before he came back. And ultimately, I just don't think that he's a fit on this team. And I just don't think that with him playing significant minutes for the Warriors, that they would be capable of playing championship caliber basketball. To me, Kuminga doesn't have that level of consistency on either end of the floor. And his presence ultimately hurts the Warriors. And it's been that way for the last 4 years. And is that Jonathan Kuminga's fault? I would say ultimately, no. It is the responsibility of the front office. Mike Dunleavy, Joe Lacob, the front office, all these guys, they needed to scout better. They needed to understand the timeline of Jonathan Kuminga and what he cannot become during the Steph Curry era. Whatever it is that he's due to become is going to come too late because of what he didn't come into the league with as a player. He didn't come into the league equipped with defense. He didn't come into the league as a powerful rebounder. He didn't come into the league with fundamentals, know-hows, and a style of play that you can consider a winning style of basketball. Winning plays. He didn't do enough of the winning stuff and was more interested in the stuff that was going to get him paid and set his family up for life. And the thing is, Kuminga as a lottery pick deserves that opportunity. The problem is, he cannot get that opportunity while the Warriors are trying to win in the Steph Curry timeline at the same time. It is, of course, on the front office to recognize that reality and understand that Kuminga is not a fit for this team if you're trying to win championships. But no, you saw that Kuminga was nowhere near ready to be that kind of player in his first year. And then second year comes and there was no improvement from the first year. And at that point, I'm just like, okay, the Warriors need to get off of James Wiseman and Jonathan Kuminga because these are not the players that are going to help Steph Curry get to the promised land. Yeah, early in the 22-23 season, I had to make a video about how Joe Lacob needed to stop the 2-timeline plan. And he needs to move off of James Wiseman and Jonathan Kuminga. And he did move off of Wiseman, but he failed to move off of Jonathan Kuminga. And what's really crazy about that is that year, the Toronto Raptors were interested in Jonathan Kuminga. And the Warriors hung up the phone at the trade deadline and refused to move Jonathan Kuminga when the Raptors were willing to offer them OG Anunoby, and the centerpiece for that trade would be Jonathan Kuminga. Not Andrew Wiggins, not Draymond Green, not any of the key guys, but just Jonathan Kuminga, maybe another side piece, and some picks. Think about that for a second. The Warriors had an opportunity to go and trade for OG Anunoby, and they could have kept Wiggins, Jordan Poole, all these guys. Think about, okay, Steph Curry, Andrew Wiggins, Klay Thompson, OG Anunoby, Draymond Green, Jordan Poole. They still had Dante DiVincenzo, Kevon Looney. They had enough pieces to go and compete for a title that year if they brought in OG Anunoby. Think about that defense for a second. Draymond Green, OG Anunoby, Andrew Wiggins, Dante DiVincenzo. Are you kidding me? And then think about what happened in the playoffs that year. Steve Kerr deemed Jonathan Kuminga not ready for playoff minutes after a brief stint against the Kings in the first round, and he basically never got playing time again, and he was a fixture part of the Warriors rotation. Imagine going into the playoffs and you're essentially missing your sixth man because he's not ready to go. And then think about the fact that the Warriors got booted in the second round after 6 games against the Lakers, who went out to go to the Western Conference Finals against the Nuggets, who ended up winning the finals. Do you understand what that means? The Warriors, in the second round, no Kuminga could not contribute to the Warriors, were forced to use GP2 and Moses Moody and Andrew Wiggins at the power forward spot, trying to guard LeBron James in the playoffs. And they were still able to take the Lakers to 6 games. Imagine if they had OG Anunoby. Add OG Anunoby into that equation, and the Warriors are beating the Lakers and going to the Western Conference Finals, and the only team that they would have to overcome is the Nuggets. And if they overcome the Nuggets, they win the finals because they would end up going up against Jimmy Butler's depleted Miami Heat team that was easily dispatched by the Nuggets in the finals. So the Warriors could have competed for a 5th title that year, and they were incapable of doing so because they refused to move a piece that was nowhere near ready to be a helpful piece in the playoffs. Guys, that is a crime. That is not Jonathan Kuminga's fault. It's not his fault that the Warriors drafted him into a situation that he should not have been in. And then last year comes and they're toiling in the play-in situation all season long, sometimes even out of the play-in situation entirely, even after getting a piece like Chris Paul. And then the Warriors basically go on their best stretch of the year last season. The final 11 games, Trayce Jackson-Davis ends up starting instead of Jonathan Kuminga, and they go 9-2, and that's why they were even in the position that they were in terms of the play-in spot that they ended up getting. And once again, Kuminga is basically a non-factor in terms of really helping this team go somewhere. And now we're in year 4, and Kuminga's defense is still nowhere near championship caliber. It comes and goes. He shows some flashes of potential here and there. He showed signs in terms of being a better defender, at least when he's at the small forward spot earlier in the season. But now that he's back to not being involved enough from an offensive standpoint, his defense is not really there. The Warriors are giving up points left and right. There is no defensive force when Jonathan Kuminga is out on the floor. He is certifiably worse for this team in terms of fit compared to a guy like Guy Santos. You know, and it makes me sound crazy, right? But it's like, there is such a thing as fit. Jonathan Kuminga can score much better than Guy Santos, and he has way more talent than a guy like Guy Santos. And yet, all the things that a guy like Guy Santos focuses on and his fit with all the teammates that are on this team, he is a much better fit for this team at the power forward spot than Jonathan Kuminga is. And because I'm not confident that Steve Kerr is going to be able to resolve this situation and find a way to make good use of a guy like Jonathan Kuminga for this team, or find these various spots where he can find combinations that actually works well for this team in some way, I just don't see it. So the continuity that Steve was able to find without Kuminga in the rotation is gone. I don't believe that they can be a championship level team with him in rotation playing critical minutes and a critical role. And that really stinks that the Warriors are now compromised into a much worse situation because of this singular player. Kuminga is a fun scoring type of player who should be developing free of the pressure of playing like a playoff caliber player or a championship caliber player at this juncture of his career. He should be making his money on a different team, having the freedom to play the way he wants to play so that a team can fully see what his full capability and what his full potential is when the ball is more consistently in his hands. Something, again, the Warriors cannot provide for him. So Joe Lacob has been holding on to this guy for God knows what reason, because it makes no sense for Joe Lacob at this point to be paying Jonathan Kuminga the money that he wants to get paid and keep him on this team, capping their ability to build around Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, and Steph Curry. And it makes no sense for a guy who should be averaging 20 plus in this league to be relegated to a Guy Santos role or a GP2 role. That doesn't make any sense either. You know, I see the Suns, and I see a very similar situation for them as well, where they have a guy like Bradley Beal who's capable of putting up 25 plus every single night. But when you put him next to Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, they are a worse team because they already have two bona fide scorers. What they need is more balance in that starting lineup, better defenders, more length, and guys that will fulfill a certain role for this team that will allow them to play a brand of basketball where they can maximize Kevin Durant and Devin Booker without having to ask them to compromise what they do for the sake of Bradley Beal, who's not good enough defensively. And you can see that when Bradley Beal is not included in the lineups where Kevin Durant and Devin Booker are playing, and you stick a guy like Ryan Dunn, a rookie, into the starting lineup instead of Bradley Beal, the Suns are much better as a team. As a matter of fact, the Suns win at a pace of a 60-win team when Bradley Beal is not playing next to them. And in Bradley Beal, we are talking about a proven player here. That is a proven all-star player in the league. And even a guy like that sometimes just doesn't fit in certain situations. And that's exactly the situation that Jonathan Kuminga is in, except Kuminga still has to prove that he's even close to an all-star caliber player in this league. Forget all-star, he has to prove that he's capable of being a winning player in this league because he hasn't shown that either. And these are the harsh truths that the Warriors are dealing with, and this is ultimately a situation that Joe Lacob has put this team under. And it's a true shame because as far as I can see, without Kuminga in the equation, the Warriors have a path to put enough lineups together where the Warriors will be able to compete for a title this year. But if they have to include Kuminga into the equation, everything gets blown up and they're not going to be the team that they need to be to go all the way to the promised land. And sadly enough, I am resigned to those possibilities that the Warriors are about to waste yet another Steph Curry prime year because they have to cater to the needs of Joe Lacob's future timeline plan and Jonathan Kuminga. It's a rough scene. There were a lot of other things that I didn't get to cover in this video because this Jonathan Kuminga situation is so nuanced and so complex and so difficult to deal with. You know, ultimately Steve Kerr went with a small lineup once again, putting GP2 in there, and they're running a small lineup, and the Warriors can't score and they can't get any stops because these small lineups don't really work because they can't score enough if Steph Curry is not included in that lineup, because as a small team, ultimately they become a jump shooting team and they don't have enough good jump shooters in that lineup without Steph Curry to play like a jump shooting team, and they're small at the same time. They can't grab rebounds, they can't stop guys from rolling to the rim, and ultimately that's why they got off to another slow start. At the same time, Quentin Post cannot be in that starting lineup because he's just too weak. He's a great shooter, but there's a lot missing in his all-around game. The guy can't even hold on to a rebound half the time because he's not strong enough. And that is why I have been advocating for the return of Trayce Jackson-Davis into that starting lineup. If they can't do that, then just stick Kevon Looney in there because their defense needs to improve from a starting standpoint with or without Kuminga. That was a problem the whole time. But it's like, how are they going to get Trayce back into the equation now that they have to give more minutes to Kuminga as it is? So yeah, these are fundamental problems that the Warriors cannot just get rid of. And I just think that ultimately they're stuck and they're going to end up being a middle-of-the-pack team again for the remaining 10 games unless Steve Kerr makes some serious fundamental changes. And I just don't see that happening. So it really stinks that this is the first video that I end up making as I make my own personal comeback. But these are the things that have been in my mind and I needed to get that out of the way. And moving forward in the remaining games, I will cover all the different nuances in those games moving forward. But the first thing that needed to be addressed was that elephant in the room. Anyway, this video has gone for too long as it is. You know, I had actually completed a Gui Santos film breakdown video against the Pistons before my account got hacked. So that video is still in the vault. Luckily, I still have it. So I will be posting that video tomorrow night. So if you're still here, I appreciate you as always more than you know. And be sure to look out for that film breakdown video featuring Gui Santos tomorrow night. I also just want to say that I'm super grateful that Steph Curry, that back injury, ultimately ended up being like a day-to-day situation. I had to really pray about that one to ensure that he would be okay and that wouldn't turn into a super dangerous situation. And he's still not out of the woods yet. Those back injuries are very tricky. He's had tailbone injuries in the past. And I think he's been having a general issue around this lower back region. And that's very tricky. So even though the Warriors ended up losing this game, I'm glad that he sat out because he needs to take care of that and he needs to not rush back from that situation. From a standing standpoint, the only good news is that other Western Conference teams have been struggling as well. The Clippers and the Timberwolves have not been able to take advantage of this Warriors 2-game losing streak situation. And the Warriors, sadly enough, had a major opportunity to really start climbing up the ranks to possibly gain home court advantage. But again, I'm no longer confident that the Warriors are going to be a powerhouse for the remaining 10 games unless Steve Kerr makes certain fundamental changes. And I'll let you know what those fundamental changes need to be in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. As always, until next time.